Look, buying your first house is supposed to be one of those capital M milestones. It's the American dream, right? A patch of grass to call your own, a roof over your head that you're paying for instead of some landlord. For me, Noah, a 26-year-old coder who'd spent the last 4 years staring at screens in a cramped city apartment, it felt less like a dream and more like a gasp for fresh air. The place wasn't much. A single-story, post-war bungalow in a sleepy suburb, where the loudest sound was usually a lawnmower on a Saturday morning. It needed work, a lot of it, but it was mine. Every cracked tile, every peeling paint chip, every squeaky floorboard was a project, a challenge I was actually excited to take on. My own little kingdom of sawdust and sweat equity. The first weekend was pure bliss. I just existed in the space. I sat on the living room floor with a pizza box and a six-pack, a stupid grin plastered on my face. The sunlight streamed through the old, wavy glass of the windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air like tiny fairies. The air smelled of old wood, sun-baked dust, and faintly of the lavender bush growing by the porch. It was peaceful. It was safe. It was, I thought, the perfect start. My grand renovation plan was to tackle the house one room at a time, and I decided to start with the master bedroom. It was the simplest, I figured. Rip up the old stained carpet, pry up the warped floorboards underneath, and lay down some nice, clean laminate. A weekend job. Tops. I was so naive. Saturday morning, I was up with the sun, fueled by coffee and a YouTube tutorial. The carpet came up easily enough, revealing a sea of ugly, yellowed linoleum tiles underneath, cracked and curling at the edges. Under that, the original hardwood planks. They were in rough shape, dark with water stains in some places, splintered in others. No wonder someone had covered them up. I grabbed my crowbar and got to work. The work was methodical, almost meditative. The screech of nails being pulled from old wood, the dull thud of planks being tossed into a pile, the sweat dripping down my forehead. It was satisfying. With each board I removed, I felt like I was peeling back the house's history, getting down to its bones, making it new again. The room was about halfway cleared when it happened. I jammed the crowbar under a particularly stubborn plank, put my weight into it, and instead of the familiar groan of wood, I heard a dull, metallic clang. I froze. That wasn't a wood sound. My first thought was a pipe. Great. Just my luck. To puncture a water pipe on my first real day of work. I crouched down, brushing away the splinters and the thick, black dust that had accumulated between the joists. But it wasn't a pipe. Below the floorboards, nestled between two thick wooden support beams, was a flat, dark surface. Metal. Curiosity got the better of me. Forget the flooring. This was way more interesting. I used the claw of my hammer to scrape away decades of grime. Slowly, a shape emerged. It was a square, maybe 2 feet by 2 feet. And in the middle of it was a recessed circular handle, the kind you see on old cellar doors. My heart did a little flutter. A trap door. The thing is, it wasn't on the blueprints. I'd gone over those plans a dozen times before I bought the place. I knew the layout by heart, every closet, every outlet. There was no mention of a cellar, a sub-basement, nothing. This was an addition, a secret. I spent the next 10 minutes working the crowbar into the seam, trying to get some leverage. The thing was sealed shut, rusted tight. My knuckles were raw, and my t-shirt was soaked through, but I was determined. Finally, with a god-awful screech of protesting metal, it gave way. I heaved it open, flipping it back on its hinges. A wave of air washed over me. It wasn't just old air. It was cold, damp, and heavy. It smelled of wet earth, of mildew, of something else. Something stagnant and forgotten. Like a breath held for half a century and just now released. I peered into the opening. A steep, narrow set of concrete steps led straight down into perfect, inky blackness. For a second, I just stood there. A part of me, the sensible part, screamed to just slam the door shut, cover it with the new flooring, and pretend I never saw it. It's not on the plans, it's not part of the house, it's not my problem. But I couldn't. I'm just not wired that way. My curiosity is a sickness sometimes. I grabbed my phone, switched on the flashlight, and pointed the beam down into the dark. The light cut a shaky white circle through the gloom, revealing damp concrete walls and the bottom of the steps, which ended on a dirt floor. It didn't look big. Probably just an old storm cellar the original owners had put in, and the next ones had covered up. Nothing to worry about. At least, that's what I told myself. Hello? I called out, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet house. Only the echo answered. Taking a deep breath, I swung my legs over the edge and started down the steps. They were slick with moisture. The air got colder with each step, the smell of damp soil more intense. The ceiling was low, I had to duck my head. When I reached the bottom, I stood up straight and swept the flashlight beam around. The space was tiny, no bigger than a walk-in closet. The walls were rough-poured concrete, weeping dark streaks of moisture. The floor was just packed dirt. It was completely empty. Almost. In one corner, tucked away against the wall, was a beat-up cardboard box. It was sagging and dark with damp, looking like it might disintegrate if I touched it. Next to it, scattered on the dirt, were a few loose sheets of paper. I nudged the box with my foot. It was light. Kneeling down, I carefully pulled back the flaps. My phone's light fell on the contents, and a weird chill that had nothing to do with the temperature of the cellar snaked up my spine. It was full of kids' toys from, I guessed, the 80s or early 90s. There was a plastic doll with faded yellow hair and one staring vacant blue eye. The other socket was empty and black. A few Matchbox cars, their paint chipped, and their wheels rusted solid. A tangled slinky. And a small red box of Crayola crayons. The kind with the built-in sharpener. It was just sad. The thought of a kid's forgotten treasures left to rot in a damp, dark hole. But it was the papers on the floor that really got to me. I picked one up. It was a child's drawing on old, yellowed construction paper. The paper felt fragile, almost brittle. The drawing was done in crayon, that waxy, thick-lined way kids draw. It depicted a simple house, a sun in the corner, and two stick figures. One was small, clearly a child. The other was wrong. It was a stick figure, but it was impossibly tall and thin. Its arms and legs were just long, single lines that stretched grotesquely, making it tower over the little house. The weirdest part, the part that made my skin crawl, was its head. It was just a circle. No eyes, no nose, no mouth. A complete blank. Underneath the drawing, written in a shaky, childish scrawl, were 3 words. The Tall Man. My hand was trembling a little. I picked up the next sheet. Same thing. A different scene. This time the small stick figure was on a swing set. But there he was again. The Tall Man, standing behind a tree in the background, his long, stick-like form unmistakable. And again, the blank, featureless face. The third drawing was the worst. It was just the Tall Man, taking up the whole page, his spindly arms seeming to reach out towards the viewer. The crayon had been pressed so hard it had torn the paper in a few spots. I dropped the drawings like they'd burned me. This wasn't sad anymore. This was creepy. Deeply, fundamentally creepy. What kid has nightmares like this and draws them? Who was the Tall Man? I felt an immediate, primal urge to get out. The small, dark space suddenly felt suffocating, like the damp walls were closing in. I scrambled back up the steps, not even looking behind me. I didn't want to see what my flashlight beam might land on. I got back into the bright, dusty air of the bedroom and, without a second thought, slammed the heavy metal door shut. The boom echoed through the house. It felt final. For a long moment I just stood there, breathing heavily, my heart hammering against my ribs. Dust motes still danced in the sunbeams, but they didn't look like fairies anymore. The comforting silence of the house now felt hollow, expectant. I tried to shake it off. It's just old drawings. A kid with a weird imagination. That's all. I grabbed an old, dirty drop cloth from the corner and threw it over the trap door, hiding it from sight. Out of sight, out of mind. I spent the rest of the day working in a sort of frantic haze, desperate to cover that spot on the floor, to seal it away under layers of plywood and laminate, to make it go away. But that night, as I lay in my sleeping bag on the living room floor, there was no way in hell I was sleeping in that bedroom. It didn't work. I couldn't get the image out of my head. The tall, thin, faceless man drawn in waxy crayon. Every creak of the old house settling, every rustle of leaves outside the window, sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. I stared at the ceiling in the dark, and I couldn't shake the unnerving, impossible feeling that I wasn't alone, and that somewhere, deep beneath the floorboards of my brand-new, perfect home, someone, or something, was down there, in the dark, looking up. Look, you don't find a secret cellar in your new house and just go on with your life like nothing happened. At least, I couldn't. For the rest of that weekend, I worked with a kind of manic energy, a desperate need to make that part of the floor disappear. I put down the underlayment, then started clicking the laminate planks into place, covering the spot where the drop cloth hid the metal door. Every click of the flooring felt like another lock being fastened, another layer of denial between me and whatever was down there. Out of sight, out of mind. That's a powerful thing. By Sunday night, the bedroom floor was done. It looked good, too. Clean, modern, no trace of the 50 years of history I'd peeled back. It looked like any other bedroom in any other new house. But I couldn't bring myself to sleep in there. I told myself it was the fumes from the adhesives, the dust still hanging in the air. That was the logical reason. The real reason, the one I didn't want to admit even to myself, was that I couldn't stand the thought of sleeping on top of that door. On top of those drawings of the blank-faced man. So, I stayed in my sleeping bag in the living room. It felt safer, somehow. Further away. The first couple of weeknights were fine. I'd come home from work, exhausted from staring at code all day, heat up a frozen dinner, watch some TV and pass out. The house was quiet. The normal, comforting quiet of a suburban street settling down for the night. The refrigerator hummed. The house creaked as it cooled. Normal sounds. My brain started to relax. I convinced myself I'd overreacted. It was just a creepy discovery, that's all. Every old house has its quirks, its forgotten corners. Mine just happened to have one with some weird kids' drawings in it. The kid probably grew up to be a horror artist or something. That was the story I told myself. And for a couple of days, I actually believed it. Then came Wednesday night. I was lying on my sleeping bag, phone on my chest, scrolling through social media before turning in. The house was dead quiet. And then I heard it. Scritch. It was so faint, I thought I'd imagined it. It sounded like a mouse, maybe, scratching at a wall somewhere. It came from the direction of the bedroom. I held my breath, listening. Silence. A minute passed. Nothing. I let my breath out, shaking my head. It's an old house, Noah. Get a grip. Of course there are going to be mice. I'd buy some traps tomorrow. Problem solved. I put my phone down, rolled over and tried to sleep. The next night it happened again. This time it was clearer. Scritch. Scritch. Scratch. A pause, then again. Scritch. It was a dry, deliberate sound, and it was definitely coming from the bedroom. Specifically, it sounded like it was coming from the floor. I sat up. Every muscle in my body tense. My mind immediately went to the trapdoor. No. It's a mouse. It's a mouse caught between the new laminate and the old subfloor. That's what it is. It was the only explanation that didn't make my skin crawl. The sound went on for another 10 minutes. A soft, irregular scratching, before it finally stopped. I didn't sleep much that night. It became a routine. A horrible, nightly routine. I started to dread the sun going down. The sounds got weirder. The scratching wasn't always the same. Sometimes it was that light, woody sound. Other nights, it had a different quality. A sharper, higher-pitched sound. A rasping. It sounded, and I know how crazy this sounds, it sounded like a fingernail being dragged across metal. It was a sound that made the fillings in my teeth ache. It came and went, never lasting for more than 20 or 30 minutes. Just long enough to make sure I was wide awake and terrified. And then the whispering started. It was about a week after the first scratch. I was lying there in the dark, tense, just waiting for the scratching to begin. But instead, a different sound reached me. It was a low, constant murmur. So low it was almost a vibration. Something I felt in my chest more than heard with my ears. It was formless. Just a steady stream of soft, sibilant noise. Shiss, shiss. Like sand skittering across a floor, or the wind through a keyhole, but there was no wind. It had the cadence of a voice, of someone talking in a steady, hushed monotone, but I couldn't make out a single word. It just went on and on and on. That was worse. So much worse than the scratching. A mouse is one thing, but this was something else. This felt intentional. The rational part of my brain was in full-blown panic mode, trying to find an explanation. It's the pipes, it's the furnace, it's the wind in the old vents. I went through a whole checklist of logical possibilities, but none of them fit. Pipes gurgle and bang. Furnaces hum and click. This was a soft, intimate sound. It sounded like a secret being told in the dark. I started to unravel. Sleep deprivation is a funny thing. It wears you down, sands away at your sanity, until you can't tell what's real, And what's just exhaustion playing tricks on your mind? I was a wreck at work. I was jumpy, irritable. My boss asked me if everything was okay at home. I just mumbled something about the stress of a new mortgage. How could I possibly explain this? Yeah, Steve, everything's great. I just think there's a ghost in my subfloor who whispers bedtime stories to me every night. I'd be in a psych evaluation by lunch, so I kept it to myself. And it was eating me alive. I started doing these nightly patrols. Before I even tried to sleep, I would walk through the house, checking every lock on every window and every door. 3, sometimes 4 times. Then I would stand in the doorway of the bedroom, just listening. I'd get down on my hands and knees and press my ear against the new laminate flooring, trying to hear something, anything. But it never worked. The sounds only ever came when I was lying down, in the dark, vulnerable. The moment I became the hunter, the moment I was actively seeking them out, the house would fall silent. It was maddening. It made me feel like I was the one who was broken, not the house. That this was all just happening inside my own head. I went a whole weekend without hearing anything. I worked in the yard, I went grocery shopping, I tried to have a normal life. I even thought, maybe it's over. Maybe I did just imagine it all, a stress-induced hallucination from the move and the renovation. That Sunday night I was so tired, I actually considered sleeping in the bedroom. I stood in the doorway for a long time, looking at my freshly made bed. It looked so inviting. But I couldn't. I just couldn't shake the feeling. I retreated to my sleeping bag in the living room one more time. I fell asleep almost instantly, which was a relief. For the first time in what felt like forever, there was just silence. Deep, peaceful, dreamless sleep. I don't know how long I was out. But what woke me up wasn't a sound. It was the absence of sound. It was that specific heavy silence that happens in the dead of night, where the world seems to be holding its breath. My eyes snapped open. I was staring at the dark ceiling. I listened. Nothing. Not the hum of the fridge. Not a creak. Not a whisper. Just absolute, total silence. A part of me was relieved. See? It was all in your head. But another, more primal part was on high alert. This silence felt different. It felt expectant. Like the quiet before a lightning strike. I lay there for what felt like an hour, my ears straining, my heart doing a slow, heavy thump-thump-thump against my ribs. I was just on the verge of relaxing, of letting my eyelids droop shut, telling myself this was ridiculous. I was letting my imagination run away with me because of some dumb drawings. It was over. I was safe. And that's when I heard it. It wasn't a scratch, it wasn't a whisper. It was a single, quiet, and perfectly distinct sound. Click. It was a metallic sound. Unmistakable. It came from the bedroom, from the floor, from right underneath where my bed would have been. It wasn't the sound of an old house settling, it wasn't a mouse. It was the clean, mechanical sound of a latch. A simple, metal latch being tested, the kind you'd find on a door. It was the sound of someone on the other side, in the dark, checking to see if it was locked. Time is a funny thing when you're terrified. It stretches and compresses. That one single click from the bedroom felt like it echoed for a full minute in the dead silence of the house. I lay there in my sleeping bag, frozen. Every muscle was coiled so tight it ached. I swear I didn't even breathe. My brain was throwing every possible rational explanation at the wall, hoping one would stick. A pipe contracting in the cold. The house settling. An animal bumping something in the crawl space. But I knew. You know when you know. That was not a random sound. It was the sound of a mechanism. Clean, sharp, and intentional. After what felt like an eternity, the silence just continued. There was no follow-up. No creak of the door opening. No footsteps. Nothing. Just the crushing, heavy quiet that had come before it. That was almost worse. The anticipation was a killer. I lay there for at least an hour, maybe 2. My ears straining to catch the slightest noise. My phone was just a few feet away, but it might as well have been on the moon. The idea of moving, of making any sound myself, was unthinkable. The logic was stupid, I know. Like a kid hiding under the blankets. If I can't see it, it can't see me. If I don't move, it won't know I'm awake. Eventually, sheer exhaustion and the slow, creeping return of a faulty sense of logic took over. Nothing else happened. Maybe it was the house. Maybe I was so on edge that my brain had amplified a normal sound into something sinister. By the time the first gray light of dawn started to filter through the living room blinds, I had managed to convince myself that I was being ridiculous. It was over. I was safe. I finally drifted into a shallow, fitful sleep. The next morning, everything felt stupidly normal. The sun was out. Birds were chirping. The whole experience felt like a bad dream, the kind that evaporates the moment you open your eyes. I got up, stretched my sore back, and went to get my day started. I needed coffee. I walked over to the small kitchen counter, where I always, without fail, drop my keys and wallet the second I walk in the door. They weren't there. Just an empty patch of laminate countertop. My wallet was there, but the keys, my car key, my new house key, a little metal bottle opener, were gone. Okay, no big deal. I was tired last night. I must have put them somewhere else. I checked my pockets. Nothing. I checked the coffee table. The end table. I looked on the floor around my sleeping bag. I started to get that frantic, prickly feeling you get when you're late and can't find something essential. I retraced my steps from the day before. I checked the lock on the front door. Maybe I'd left them hanging there. No, I spent 10 minutes tearing the living room and kitchen apart. My frustration was quickly giving way to a low-grade panic. This was stupid. Where could they be? I was about to give up and call a locksmith when I decided to use the bathroom. I walked in, flipped on the light, and stopped dead. Sitting on the white porcelain of the windowsill, perfectly aligned with the grout lines of the tile, was my keychain. I just stared at it. I had never, not once, taken my keys into the bathroom. There is no reason on this earth for me to have done that. I don't put things on that windowsill. It's narrow. It's dusty. The keys were sitting there, looking neat and tidy, almost deliberately placed. A cold dread, colder than the morning air, washed over me. It was the same feeling from the night before, that sense of an invisible line being crossed. It was one thing to hear sounds from beneath the floor. It was another thing entirely to have my own things moved. To have my personal space, my routine, violated. I snatched the keys, my hand shaking slightly, and got out of the house as fast as I could. I sat in my car for a long time before I could bring myself to drive to work. The next couple of days were a blur of paranoia. The house wasn't making noises anymore. The scratching, the whispering, it all stopped. But the silence was no longer comforting. It was watchful. I felt like I was being observed. I came home from work each night, and the first thing I would do, before even taking my shoes off, was a full sweep of the house. I'd walk through each room, my heart pounding, looking for anything out of place. A chair moved an inch. A cabinet door left ajar. I was losing my mind, I thought. I was creating this narrative out of stress and fear. And then, a few days later, it happened again. I had been reading a dense, technical book on programming languages for a big project at work. I always left it on the tiny desk I'd set up in the corner of the living room, a yellow, sticky note marking my page. That evening, I came home, did my usual paranoid sweep, nothing. I went to make dinner and found my book. It was sitting on the kitchen counter, right next to the sink, the cover damp from a few stray drops of water. The yellow sticky note was gone. This one hit me harder than the keys. The keys, you could argue, were an act of forgetfulness, a brain fart. But this was different. This felt like a message. It was so specific, so absurd. It was like someone was playing a game with me. A cruel, quiet game to see how long it would take for me to break. My first instinct was anger, a hot, furious wave of it. Who the hell was doing this? I stormed through the house, checking every lock on every window for the 10th time that week. All locked. All secure. I checked the back door, the front door. Both bolted from the inside. There was no way in, and no way out. The thought hit me like a physical blow. The only person who could be doing this was me. I must be doing it. Sleepwalking, maybe? The stress of the new house, the mortgage, the noises. Maybe it had finally cracked something in my head. Maybe I was the one moving things in the middle of the night and then forgetting. The idea terrified me more than any ghost or intruder. The thought that I couldn't trust my own mind was a special kind of hell. That night, I barely slept. I lay in my sleeping bag, rigid, trying to stay awake, trying to catch myself in the act. But I just lay there, listening to the crushing silence, until the sun came up. It was a Saturday morning when the game ended. I woke up late, feeling groggy and unrested. I had finally drifted off around 4 a.m., and the sleep was heavy, dreamless. I sat up, rubbing my eyes, and my gaze fell to the floor next to my sleeping bag. And my blood ran cold. There, on the clean, light-colored laminate flooring, was a footprint. It wasn't a shoe print. It was the print of a bare foot. It was distinct, perfectly formed, and caked in dark, dried mud that had flaked off onto the floor around its edges. A long, narrow foot, with long, splayed toes. It was just a single print, pointing from the direction of the bedroom, right toward the spot where my head had been resting moments before. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. All the theories about me losing my mind, sleepwalking, all of it evaporated in an instant. That was not my foot. My feet aren't that long or that narrow. And I hadn't been outside in the mud. The world seemed to shrink down to just that one impossible artifact on my floor. A physical, undeniable piece of evidence that someone else had been in the room with me while I slept. They had stood right there, next to my head, close enough to touch me. The silence in the house was no longer watchful. It was predatory. I scrambled up, my back hitting the wall, my eyes scanning every dark corner of the living room. It was empty. I grabbed a heavy mag light from the counter, my only weapon, and did the only thing I could think of. I went to check the doors. The front door, deadbolt still locked, chains still on. The back door, deadbolt and knob lock still engaged. I went from window to window, my heart hammering against my ribs. Locked, 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 all of them, locked from the inside. There was no explanation, no logical way for someone to have gotten in, left a single muddy footprint, and gotten out without leaving a trace. It was impossible, unless they never left. The thought was so horrifying it almost made me sick. My eyes were drawn, as if by a magnet, to the closed door of the bedroom. The source. The place where it all started. The sounds, the click, and now this. I had to know. The rational part of my brain was screaming at me to grab my keys and my wallet and get out, just run and never look back. But another part, a part that was sick of being scared and confused, needed an answer. With the heavy flashlight gripped in my white-knuckled fist, I walked slowly, deliberately, towards the bedroom. I pushed the door open. The room was just as I'd left it. The new floor gleamed in the morning light. The messy pile of blankets on the bed I still hadn't slept in was undisturbed. Everything looked normal, except I knew it wasn't. I knew that underneath that clean, modern floor was the truth. I knelt down. I didn't need to put my ear to the floor this time. I knew what was down there. My hands were trembling as I grabbed the edge of the large area rug I'd thrown down to help cover the spot, the one I'd put there for a sense of normalcy. I peeled it back. The gray, metal trap door was just as I'd left it, covered in a fine layer of dust, pitted with old age and rust spots. For a second, a wave of relief washed over me. It was closed. It was undisturbed. Maybe the footprint came from somewhere else. Maybe I was wrong. But then my eyes adjusted, and I saw them. They were faint, lines of silver against the dull, oxidized gray. Scratches. Long, deep, parallel scratches in the metal. They weren't old marks. They were fresh. So fresh they gleamed, reflecting the light from the window. They were concentrated around the edge of the door, near the simple latch I had heard click, as if someone had been clawing at the seam, trying to find a purchase. And they weren't on top of the door. My heart stopped. The flashlight beam wavered in my unsteady hand. The scratches, every single one of them, were gouged into the metal from the other side. They were the marks of someone desperately trying to pry the door open. From below, my brain just stopped. You know that blue screen of death on an old computer? That was me. I was kneeling on the floor, staring at those silver scratches against the dull gray metal, and my entire operating system had crashed. Every rational thought, every attempt to explain away the noises or the misplaced keys, it was all just gone. Wiped clean. What was left was the one, single, undeniable truth, gleaming up at me from the floor. Someone had been down there, and they had been trying to get out. I don't know how long I knelt there. Time just sort of smeared. Eventually, a single, cold thought managed to push its way through the static. They were clawing at the door while I was sleeping on the other side. The proximity of it made me physically ill. I scrambled backwards on my hands and knees, crab-walking away from that bedroom door like it was radioactive. I didn't stand up until my back hit the living room wall. My eyes were locked on that closed door. It wasn't a door to a bedroom anymore, it was a cage door. And I had no idea if the latch was still holding. I spent the rest of the day in a state of hypervigilant paralysis. I didn't eat, I didn't drink. I just sat on the couch, facing the bedroom, listening. The silence was worse than any noise had ever been. Before, the silence felt empty. Now, it felt full. It felt like a held breath. Every time the house creaked, I'd jump a foot in the air. The sound of the refrigerator kicking on made my heart slam against my ribs. I was a wreck. A complete and total wreck. The muddy footprint was still there by my sleeping bag. I couldn't bring myself to clean it up. It felt like evidence. Evidence for who, I had no idea. But I couldn't erase it. It was the only thing proving I wasn't losing my mind. Night came. I didn't even think about sleeping. The idea was laughable. How could anyone sleep in this house? I turned on every single light. The living room, the kitchen, the bathroom, the hallway. I wanted this place lit up like a stadium. Shadows were the enemy. I sat there, on the couch, with the heavy mag light from the counter resting in my lap. My phone was in my hand, the screen open to the dial pad, ready to hit 911. I must have looked insane, sitting there in a brightly lit, empty house, armed with a flashlight. But I didn't care. The hours ticked by. 10 o'clock, 11, midnight, nothing. Just the oppressive, listening silence, and the low hum of the lights. A part of my brain, the logical part that was now a tiny, screaming voice in a hurricane of fear, tried to reassert itself. Maybe they're gone. Maybe they tried to get out, failed, and left through their secret tunnel system. It was a comforting thought. A stupid one, but comforting. I held on to it. Maybe the worst was over. And then the storm hit. It started with the wind. A low moan that worked its way up to a high-pitched shriek, rattling the window frames. Then came the rain. Not a gentle pitter-patter, but a hard, driving deluge, like someone was throwing handfuls of gravel against the glass. The lights flickered once. Twice, my heart seized in my chest. No, please no, I did not want to be in this house in the dark. Not now. The lights held, for now, but the storm was a living thing outside, trying to break in. I found myself pacing. I couldn't sit still anymore. I walked from the living room to the kitchen and back again, my path a tight, worn-out loop of anxiety. My gaze kept getting pulled to the large picture window in the living room that looked out onto the overgrown backyard. The rain was so heavy it was like a gray curtain, obscuring everything. The wind was thrashing the branches of the big oak tree at the edge of the property, making them dance like skeletal arms. I was staring out, not really seeing anything, just lost in my own terror, when a bolt of lightning split the sky. For one brilliant, overexposed second, the entire yard was lit up in stark, chemical white light. And I saw it. It was standing at the edge of the property line, partially obscured by the thrashing oak tree. A figure. It was just a silhouette against the white flash, but it was unmistakably human. And it was tall. So tall, and impossibly thin. It was standing perfectly still, its long limbs held rigidly at its sides, its head tilted slightly as if it were listening. Staring directly at my house. The world plunged back into darkness. My breath caught in my throat. I stood there, frozen, my face inches from the cold glass of the window. It was a branch. It was just a weirdly shaped branch. The lightning played a trick on your eyes. You're overtired, you're terrified, you're seeing things. I was desperately trying to feed myself lies. Anything to push back the image that had been burned onto my retinas. A tall, thin man. A stick figure. My mind screeched to a halt. The drawings. The crayon drawings from the cellar. The ones the child had made. The simple, terrifying stick figures labeled Mr. Tallman. The shape was identical. It was him I needed to see again. I needed to prove myself wrong. I pressed my hands against the wall on either side of the window, waiting, praying for another flash of lightning, my entire body trembling. The rain hammered down. The wind howled. It felt like an eternity. Come on, come on. Flash. The yard was illuminated again, another world-ending burst of white. He was still there. He hadn't moved an inch. Still standing in the same spot, a motionless pillar of black against the violent light. A scarecrow made of bone and shadow. But this time, the light caught something. There was no detail, no real face to see, but I could make out the pale oval of his head turned directly towards my window, towards me. I felt his gaze like a physical impact, a hollow, empty pressure that went right through the glass, through the wall, and into my soul. He knew I was there. He knew I was looking. A sound escaped my throat, a choked, pathetic whimper. I stumbled backwards, my legs giving out from under me. I landed hard on the floor, my head thudding against the drywall. I scrambled away from the window, crawling on all fours like an animal, until I was huddled in the corner of the room, as far away from the yard as I could get. I squeezed my eyes shut, wrapping my arms around my head as if that could somehow make me invisible. He's outside. He's real. He's not a ghost or a sound or a figment of my imagination. He's a person, a thing of flesh and bone, and he's been living under my house. He's been moving my keys. He's been standing over me while I sleep. And now he's in my yard, watching me. The game was over. This wasn't a haunting, this was a siege. I don't know how long I stayed cowering in that corner. My mind was just a loop of pure, white-hot terror. The image of that tall, thin silhouette burned behind my eyelids. The storm raged on, a soundtrack to my breakdown. Eventually, a new feeling started to seep through the fear. It was hot and sharp. It was anger. Raw, primal, cornered animal anger. Who the hell was this guy? Who the hell did he think he was? To invade my home, to terrorize me, to stand in my yard like he owned the place. The fear was still there, a massive, crushing weight, but now the anger was there too, giving me something to hold on to. The feeling of being a helpless victim started to recede, replaced by a desperate, frantic need to do something. I couldn't stay here cowering in a corner waiting for him to decide to come inside. I couldn't live one more second knowing that trap door was the only thing between me and him. I pushed myself up. My legs were shaky, but they held. The lights flickered again, and this time they stayed off for a full 3 seconds before stuttering back to life. That was it. That was the final push. I wasn't going to be trapped in the dark with him. My thinking became brutally simple. The problem comes from below. The problem is the door. The solution is to remove the door from the equation. Permanently. I wasn't thinking about police or explanations or selling the house anymore. My world had shrunk to a single violent objective. I marched out of the living room, down the short hall, and threw open the door to the small utility closet that connected to the garage. The garage was dark and smelled of damp concrete and oil. I fumbled for the light switch, flicking it on. My eyes scanned the pegboard on the wall, past the rakes and shovels. I saw what I was looking for. Leaning in the corner was a sledgehammer, its head a heavy, 10-pound block of steel, its handle made of thick, worn hickory. Next to the workbench was an open box of nails. Not small ones. These were 6-inch galvanized spikes, the kind you'd use to frame a house. Thick, brutal, and absolute. I grabbed the sledgehammer. The weight of it in my hands felt good. It felt real. It felt powerful. I scooped up a handful of the heavy spikes and shoved them into my pocket, the sharp points digging into my thigh. I had no plan beyond this. All I knew was that I was not going to be the one cowering in the dark anymore. He wanted to scratch at the door from below? Fine. I was going to make sure that door never, ever opened again. With a heavy hammer in my grip, I turned and walked back into the house, my footsteps echoing with a purpose I hadn't felt since this nightmare began. I was going to war with the man under my floor. The weight of the sledgehammer in my hands was the only real thing in the world. It was heavy, solid, an anchor in a swirling sea of panic. The anger I'd felt in the living room, that hot, righteous fury, had already cooled into something else. Something colder and sharper. A kind of surgical desperation. I wasn't going to war anymore. I was performing an amputation. Cutting the rot out of my house before it killed me. I walked down the hall, each step feeling loud and deliberate on the old wood floors. The house was still lit up like a Christmas tree, every corner blazing, pushing back the shadows. But the light didn't feel safe anymore. It felt like a stage. It felt like it was just making me a better target. My bedroom door was ajar. I pushed it open. The room looked just as I'd left it that morning. The sleeping bag a messy heap on the floor, the muddy footprint still next to it like a fossilized omen. My gaze went right to the corner, to the worn patch of rug that I knew covered the metal door. The problem? I set the sledgehammer down on the floor next to me. The thud of its steel head hitting the wood was deafening in the charged silence. I knelt, my knees cracking, my hands were shaking, but my movements were precise. I grabbed the edge of the cheap area rug and pulled. It was heavy, and it came away with a dusty sigh, revealing the dull gray square of metal set flush with the floorboards. The scratch marks gleamed under the overhead light. They looked like silver scars. Proof. I picked up the sledgehammer again. My knuckles were white around the hickory handle. In my pocket, the 6-inch nails I'd grabbed felt like talons digging into my leg. The plan was simple, brutal, and stupid. I was going to hammer a dozen of these spikes straight through the metal door and into the wooden frame beneath it. I'd turn that trap door into a coffin lid, a permanent, immovable part of the floor. Let him scratch at that. I took a breath, trying to steady myself. The air tasted like dust and fear. I raised the sledgehammer over my shoulder, positioning myself, my muscles bunching for the first, decisive swing. I was going to bring it down, right on the edge, right where the metal met the wood. I was going to seal him in his hole forever. My eyes were locked on the target. I tensed, ready to bring all my weight, all my fear, all my anger down in one single, violent act. Click. It was the smallest sound. A tiny metallic tick from somewhere in the house, followed by a low hum that instantly died. And then every light in the house went out. The darkness wasn't just an absence of light. It was a physical presence. It was thick, total, and suffocating. The kind of black you only find deep underground. My eyes, which had been adjusted to the blazing light, were useless. I couldn't see the hammer in my hands. I couldn't see the floor beneath me. I was blind. And the silence. Oh God, the silence. The hum of the refrigerator, the buzz of the old light fixtures, the faint whisper of the circuit breaker. It was all gone. It was a dead, perfect vacuum. My own ragged breathing was an explosion in the stillness. For a second, nothing happened. My mind was a blank slate of pure, animal terror. The sledgehammer suddenly felt impossibly heavy. My plan, my anger, it all evaporated into the blackness. I was just a man, kneeling in the dark, holding a heavy tool I couldn't use. And then I heard it. It started from below my feet, from the other side of the metal door. It wasn't a scratch. It wasn't a whisper. It was a slow, deliberate creak. A low, wooden groan, the sound of immense pressure being applied. It was followed by the long, drawn-out shriek of stressed metal. The sound of the latch. The latch I had so carefully bolted from my side. It wasn't being forced. It wasn't being broken. It was being unfastened. From the other side. My brain just refused to process it for a second. That wasn't possible. It was a simple slide bolt. It couldn't be operated from below. It was impossible. But the sound was undeniable. A final, sharp snick echoed up through the floor. The sound of the bolt clearing its housing. The hammer slipped from my hand. It was like my nerves just gave up. It fell from my grasp and hit the wooden floorboards with a catastrophic echoing clang. The sound hammered through the silence, loud as a gunshot. It was a dinner bell. It was a declaration. I am here. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. My blood turned to ice water. He knew. He knew exactly where I was. And then, the sound I had been dreading more than any other in my life, the squeal of rusty hinges as the trap door right next to my knee began to slowly, deliberately swing open. Upwards. Into the room. My body finally reacted. It wasn't a thought, it was a pure, instinctual command from the oldest part of my brain. Run. Hide. I scrambled backwards on my hands and knees, my palms scraping against the rough wood. I didn't know where I was going, I was just moving away from the sound. My flailing hand hit something solid. The wooden frame of the closet. Without a single thought, I fumbled for the knob, pulled the door open, and threw myself inside. I pulled the door shut behind me, plunging myself into an even deeper darkness, a cramped space that smelled of old wood and mothballs. I pressed myself back against the wall, tucked my knees to my chest, and held my breath until my lungs burned. I was in a box, a coffin, and the monster was out. I listened. I had never listened so hard in my entire life. My entire being was focused into my ears. First, there was the soft, final thump as the heavy trapdoor finished opening and rested against the floor of the bedroom. Then, silence again, a long, drawn-out silence that stretched my nerves to the breaking point. Was he waiting? Was he listening for me? Then, another sound. The sound of a body moving. The rustle of cloth, and then a footstep. It landed on the wooden floor of my bedroom, but it wasn't a normal footstep. It was slow, heavy, and there was a dragging sound to it. Thump. Like one foot was being lifted and placed, and the other was just being dragged along behind it. Thump. He was in my room. He was walking on my floor. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I clamped a hand over my mouth to stifle the terrified sobs that were trying to claw their way out of my throat. I could hear him moving around the bedroom. Thump. A pause, then the faint delicate sound of my keys being lifted from the nightstand. A soft jingle full of a quiet alien curiosity. He set them down again. My mind was screaming. What do you want? What are you doing? Thump. Shh. He was moving again. He left the bedroom. I heard his slow, dragging footsteps move down the short hallway, into the living room. I pictured him in my mind, a tall, spindly shadow moving through the absolute blackness of my home. My home. It wasn't my home anymore. It was his. He was just letting me live in it. I heard the sound of him in the kitchen, the soft groan of a cabinet door opening, the quiet clink of a glass. I heard the refrigerator door open, its seal peeling apart. He was just exploring, like a new tenant inspecting the property. This casual, unhurried desecration of my space was somehow worse than a violent rampage. It was intimate. It was possessive. Time ceased to exist. I was just a bundle of terror crammed into a dark closet, listening to the slow, methodical sounds of my life being examined by a nightmare. How long was I in there? Minutes? An hour? I had no idea. Then the sounds in the kitchen stopped. Silence returned. A thick, expectant silence. My ears strained, trying to catch any hint of movement. Nothing. Where did he go? Thump! Shh! The sound was closer now. Much closer. He was in the hallway again. Coming back. Thump! Shh! He was at the bedroom door. Thump! Shh! He was in the room with me, just outside the thin wooden door of my hiding place. My breath hitched. I squeezed my eyes shut, as if that could make me invisible. I tried to make myself smaller, tried to melt into the back wall of the closet. The dragging footsteps stopped. They stopped right in front of the closet door. I could feel him there. I couldn't see him, I couldn't hear him, but I could feel his presence on the other side of the wood, a cold spot in the universe. The silence was absolute. I couldn't even hear him breathing. It was just me and him, separated by half an inch of pine. My body was trembling so violently I was sure he could hear it. My teeth were chattering. Please go away, please just go away, please. The silence stretched for an eternity. Maybe he'd leave. Maybe he didn't know I was in here. Maybe the hammer falling was just a random noise to him. Click. The sound of the closet doorknob turning. Slow. Deliberate. Not a jiggle, just a smooth, confident rotation. The door began to open. A thin sliver of less darkness appeared. The ambient light from the storm-covered night sky outside was filtering faintly through the bedroom window, casting the room in a deep, murky gray. The sliver of gray widened as the door swung silently inward. My heart had stopped. My lungs had stopped. My entire world had narrowed to that widening crack. The door stopped moving when it was open just a foot, and a figure filled the frame. It was exactly like the drawings. Impossibly tall, impossibly thin. A scarecrow, made of bone and grimy, tattered clothing. It had to duck its head to look inside, and I saw its face. It wasn't a mask. It wasn't a monster. It was a man. But a man who had been hollowed out, starved down to nothing but sinew and want. His face was a gaunt skull covered in a thin layer of gray, dirt-streaked skin. His cheeks were sunken, his lips a pale, bloodless line. But his eyes, they were a bottomless, vacant black. There was no life in them, no anger, no madness, nothing. They were like two dark holes drilled into a skull, and they fixed on me, huddled in the corner. He wasn't surprised. He wasn't triumphant. He just looked. He looked right at me. Time just, it didn't exist. There was the inside of the closet, which was my entire world, and there was the sliver of gray light from the doorway, which was the end of it. And in that doorway was his face. It wasn't a monster. That's the part that really, truly messes me up to this day. A monster, I could have understood. A demon, a ghost, something from a nightmare. But this was a man. A man so thin he looked like a bundle of sticks wrapped in dirty skin. His eyes weren't angry. They weren't anything. They were just empty, like two black holes, and they were looking right at me. He knew I was there. He'd known all along. My brain was a blue screen. Nothing. No thoughts, no plans. Just the high-pitched ringing of pure terminal fear in my ears. I was going to die in a closet that smelled like mothballs, killed by a hollowed-out man who lived under my floor. This was it. This was the end of the story. I could feel the air leaving my lungs, not in a scream but in a slow, defeated hiss. My body had already given up. He started to move, slowly bringing a long, skeletal hand up towards the door frame, as if to steady himself. His movements were weak, shaky. He looked like he could be pushed over by a strong breeze. But I knew that was a lie. He had the strength to unbolt a locked door from the wrong side. He had the strength to live down there in the dark. And then, light. It wasn't a holy light. It wasn't salvation from above. It was headlights. A car, probably some kid coming home late, turned onto my street, and its high beams sliced through the dark, right across my bedroom window. For one blinding second, the entire room was bathed in brilliant, artificial daylight. The man in the doorway flinched. It was a violent, full-body spasm, like an animal caught in a trap. He threw his arm up to shield his face, hissing, a dry, rattling sound like dead leaves skittering across pavement. He staggered back a step, losing his balance. His empty eyes suddenly squinted shut against the unexpected glare. The car passed. The light vanished. The room plunged back into murky gray darkness. But in that 1 second, something in my brain re-engaged. It wasn't a thought. It was an instinct, older and more powerful than any fear. It was the cornered rat instinct. The fight or you die switch that you don't even know you have until you're there. I didn't get up. I didn't plan. I just exploded. I threw my entire body weight forward, slamming my shoulder into the thin pine of the closet door. The door flew open the rest of the way, crashing hard into his side. There was a sickening wet crunch and a grunt of pain that sounded shockingly human. He wasn't a phantom. He had bones that could break. He stumbled sideways, completely off balance, his long limbs flailing in the dark. That was my chance. I scrambled out of the closet on all fours, like an animal, my hands smacking the floor, my only thought being out, out, out. I could hear him behind me, a gasp and the sound of fabric rustling as he tried to right himself. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I crab-walked backward out of the bedroom, my eyes locked on the darkness where he was. I got to my feet in the hallway, my legs shaking so badly I almost fell over again. I turned and ran. My house was a maze of black shapes that I knew were furniture. I slammed my hip into the corner of the hallway table, a jolt of white-hot pain shooting up my side, but I didn't even feel it. I fumbled for the front door, my hands slapping against the wood, searching for the deadbolt. My fingers were numb and useless. For a horrifying second, I couldn't work the lock. I could hear him moving in the bedroom. A slow, dragging step. Thump. Shh. He was coming. No, 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 I whimpered, a frantic prayer to the god of deadbolts. The lock finally gave. I twisted the knob and threw the door open, stumbling out into the cool, damp night air. The moment my feet hit the wet grass of my own lawn, the dam broke. I opened my mouth and I screamed. It wasn't a word. It was just a raw, tearing sound ripped from the deepest part of my gut. A sound of pure, unadulterated terror. I screamed and screamed, gulping in the night air and letting it out again as noise. A light flicked on in the house next door. Mr. Henderson's porch light, then another one across the street. I was still screaming, pointing a trembling hand back at my own dark, open front door. "He's in there! In my house!" I yelled, my voice cracking. "He's in my house!" Mr. Henderson, a heavy-set guy in his 60s who usually just waved at me while mowing his lawn, came jogging across the wet grass in his pajamas, a mag light in one hand. "Nom? Son, what in God's name is going on?" His voice was thick with sleep and alarm. "Call the police," I gasped, clutching his arm. "Please, just call the police. There's a man in my house." His face went from confused to grim in a heartbeat. His wife, a small, kind woman, was standing on their porch, her hand over her mouth. "Jean, be careful," she called out. Jean Henderson didn't hesitate. He stood on my porch, shining his powerful flashlight beam through the open door. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the living room. It was empty. Messy, but empty. "He came from the floor," I babbled, the words tumbling out of me. "From under the floor in the bedroom. The trap door." Mr. Henderson took a cautious step inside, his light sweeping the room before moving down the hall. I stayed on the grass, trembling, refusing to go back in. From the porch I could hear his footsteps, then a sharp intake of breath. "Oh, sweet Jesus," he muttered. He came back out a moment later, his face pale. "You stay right here, son. I'm calling 911. He looked at me, then at my house, and the way he looked at it was different now. It wasn't just my house anymore, it was something else. A crime scene. The next hour was a blur of flashing blue and red lights, the crackle of police radios, and the low, calm voices of people who were paid to walk into nightmares. They wrapped me in a shock blanket and sat me in the back of an ambulance, even though I wasn't physically hurt. A paramedic checked my vitals while I tried to tell my story to a grim-faced police officer. I felt insane. I knew how it sounded. A man came out of a secret door in my floor. It was the stuff of campfire stories. But then, they saw the trap door. They saw the muddy footprints leading from it. They saw the sledgehammer and the nails I dropped on the floor. My story stopped being crazy and started being terrifyingly real. 2 officers, younger and braver than I could ever be, drew their weapons and went down into the hole. I just sat in the ambulance, watching my house, which was now lit up brighter than I'd ever made it. I watched them disappear into my floor. The silence that followed was worse than any noise. After what felt like a lifetime, one of the officers came back up. He spoke to the officer who was with me, his voice low. I couldn't make out the words, but I saw the look on their faces. It wasn't the look of a routine B&E. It was something else. A deep, professional unease. The officer, a sergeant named Miller, came over to the ambulance. He had kind eyes but a face that had seen too much. "Mr. Tran," he said, his voice level. "We didn't find anyone down there. He's gone." I felt a wave of relief so powerful it almost made me sick. "Gone? Where could he go?" Miller sighed, running a hand over his crew cut. "That's the thing. It's not just a cellar, it's a tunnel. An old one. We followed it about 50 yards before it got too tight. It looks like it connects to the old storm drain system for this entire block. Some of it was abandoned back in the 70s. He could be anywhere by now." The idea was horrifying. He hadn't just been in my house. He had access to a whole hidden world right under our feet. He could have come up anywhere. "We did find where he was staying," Miller continued, his voice dropping a little. "It was a nest of sorts. Some old blankets, empty cans of beans, water bottles. It looks like he's been living down there for a while." For a while. The words echoed in my head. Not a ghost. Not a one-time intruder. A roommate. A secret, silent roommate I never knew I had. Living under my feet. Listening. I thought about all the nights I'd slept alone, the private phone calls, the times I'd walked around my own home feeling safe. My stomach turned over. The violation was so complete, so absolute, it felt like a physical sickness. "He's just some homeless guy?" I asked, the words feeling hollow and stupid. "We don't know what he is yet," Miller said carefully, "but we found something else. I need to show you. I'm sorry, but it's important. I need to know if this means anything to you." He gestured to another officer, who brought over a clear plastic evidence bag. Miller held it up. Inside was a cheap, spiral-bound notebook, the kind you buy at a drugstore. It looked new. My blood ran cold. I don't know why, it was just a notebook, but I knew, instinctually, that this was the real horror. This was worse than the man in the closet. "Take a look at this page," Miller said, turning the notebook inside the bag so I could see the first page. It was my handwriting. No, it wasn't. It was a careful, meticulous copy of my handwriting. And it was a schedule. My schedule. 7:15 a.m. alarm. Snoozes twice. 7:33 a.m. shower. 7:50 a.m. makes coffee. Black. 1 sugar. 8:12 a.m. leaves for work. Blue Honda Civic. 6:45 p.m. returns home. 7 p.m. microwaves dinner. 8 p.m. to 11:30 p.m. at computer. Living room. 11:35 p.m. bedroom. Light out. It went on like this, day after day, for 2 months. 2 months. He had documented my life with a terrifying, obsessive precision. He knew when I snoozed my alarm. He knew how I took my coffee. "Oh God," I breathed. My vision started to swim. "It gets worse," Miller said, his voice grim. He flipped to a page further back in the notebook. It was a drawing. A simple, almost childish drawing in black pen. It was a sketch of my bedroom. My bed, my nightstand, the window. It was a drawing of me, sleeping, a lump under the covers. And standing in the corner of the room, right by the closet, was a tall, thin stick figure. It had no face. Underneath it, written in shaky block letters, were 2 words. Mr. Tallman. Miller flipped the page. Another drawing. Me, sitting at my computer in the living room, my back to the room. And in the dark hallway behind me, the tall, faceless stick figure was standing there, watching. Page after page, me cooking, me watching TV, me reading in bed. And in every single drawing, somewhere in the frame, peeking through a window, standing in a dark doorway, looming just behind me, was Mr. Tallman. He wasn't just living under me. He had made me the center of his twisted secret world. He wasn't haunting my house, he was haunting me.